Hello and welcome to Fathoms Deep. From Common Room Radio, I'm Liz Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive.
So we're heading into episode 2 today, and we were talking about how each season, rather than having the episodes named, there's just the number. It's just 1, 2, 3 in the Roman numerals. And you had an idea about that.
I do.
Daphne. What is that?
Well, and I noticed it because it is a tiny bit confusing after season 1, since season 1
that
is
you jump back to 1.
Right.
Yeah.
No, you don't jump back to 1. You go, the first season is 8 episodes. I see what you're saying. But the first, in their numbering, their title numbers, the first episode of season 2 is 9.
Oh.
So it's the Roman numerals. Like, they don't have titles that are names. They have titles that are just Roman numerals.
Okay.
And they count from the first episode of season 1. They just count up all the way through
so it's
the
like
3
chapters from a book.
Exactly.
That's fantastic.
Exactly.
I didn't even notice that. I just assumed that it started back over at 1 with season 2. That's fantastic.
So we have 28 episodes. The last one is episode 28.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I just noticed it recently. Like when rewatching for the podcast, I just suddenly, I always noticed that it was a little awkward because you had to kind of choose which way you were going to talk about the episode. It's Roman numeral or, season 3, episode 1 or whatever.
Right.
But it just struck me that because I was talking to a lot of people about how much I think this is a well-told story.
Yeah.
And how cohesive the story is. It does, again, I feel like storytelling gets stronger with time.
Yes.
But it feels like one story.
Yeah. Well, and that makes me feel safer in the hands of the writers, too, because I'm still a little burned by a few shows. Lost and Battlestar Galactica, where I'm just like, what were you doing this whole time? Did you even know? So maybe the idea that they're going through the numbers and it's not like, okay, new season, what are we doing? But rather big story, big picture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is a big story broken into episodes that each one is its own good story.
Right. Yeah.
But I just feel like the numbering really expresses this idea that this is one story. This is one beautifully thought out story.
Yeah.
And so far, I have seen nothing to tell me it's going to be anything different than that. I'm so looking forward to the future seasons as well as us talking about these ones.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because I totally noticed that recently and it really struck me as very true to what's going on here.
Sail!
Okay, so let's talk about episode 2.
Yeah, why don't you walk us through the synopsis?
Alrighty. So we start with Eleanor and Max, and we will talk about them. But we start out in Max's room, and Max and Eleanor are waking up. And this is a really lovely, intimate scene, and we can discuss the character stuff in a little bit. But I just feel like, we learn a lot about them there.
We do, yep.
And then when we get to the walrus, we go right back. Actually, in both of these things, we go right back to where we were at the end of episode 1.
Yeah,
so we're
which is great.
Continue with Max and Eleanor right where we left them. Mm-hmm. We continue with Billy literally right where we left him. He is holding that piece of paper still.
Yeah, and even holding that expression that, I love it. I call it his haunted expression where he's just trying to decide, did I do the right thing?
Right.
Yeah, did I make the right call? What have I done?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
because he realizes that he has now put the fate of the crew in his hands. It was entirely up to him. It was a huge decision.
Yep.
Big turning point for Billy.
Yep. He was told that Flint should be his king, and then he made him so.
Wow. Yep. You're absolutely right. He made the call.
And then I'm just going to always focus a little bit on Randall because I can't help myself.
That's okay. Everybody has favorites.
So there's the moment after that, where you then kind of cut over to Randall and Silver watching the chaos that's happening of this kind of post excitement that they're having after this big battle and this big resolution and this rousing speech by Flint. And then Randall says, "You must not steal." And this is the thing we're going to love about Randall. And we're not going to talk about Randall really a lot as his character, but I just want to bring this up. So we were introduced to Randall. We understand that stuff happened to him and he may
he's not quite all there.
Right. He's not quite all there. So he will throughout say stuff and it's not always clear who he's talking to and how much he understands
absolutely.
the situation. So that was really interesting because like Silver thought he was talking to him.
Yes, and he gets horrified for a moment.
And then we see, and this brings in the people who are going to be important in this episode, is he says it again, and then the two men standing next to him, which it turns out are what's left of the mutiny.
Yes, that's right.
They hear him say it, and they think he's talking about Singleton.
Right. Yeah.
So this is going to be a thing that Randall does. This is going to be a role he plays in the story of like saying things, and everyone kind of not respecting him, not thinking that he's really important, and yet totally listening to him.
Yes. Yeah.
So
fascinating.
So this is part of my keep an eye on Randall theme that I personally want to inject into everything.
There you go. Sounds good.
Okay, and then we have in Flint's office, and we see him holding that feather.
Yes, which is also a great piece of visual storytelling. Yeah, so now we know what he's talking about.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yep. He's talking about the thief and that someone has come into the captain's quarters and stolen the page.
Right. And yeah, I just have to say, like, I love the fact that there isn't a moment where Flint holds up this feather and says,
because of this feather.
Right. I know what's happening because let me explain everything you just saw with this feather.
Exactly. Yeah. It's good. I like it when they give us the benefit of the doubt because they don't always. In this same episode, in fact, sometimes they play things a little more heavy handed. So I like that where there's the subtlety.
I'm looking forward to hearing where, that's going to be a fun discussion. And then pretty much like Silver understands like this at the same moment, like he needs to get out of here.
Yeah, I've got to get out of here.
They start chasing him.
They start to suspect Silver. Silver starts to run.
Right. And this was an interesting thing that Gates realized that he hadn't searched Silver.
Yeah.
So this was, I feel different ways about this. Like part of me kind of buys how that happened. And part of me is like, really, Gates? Like, why didn't you search him? Like,
yeah. Yep. I hear you.
But this will go to one of the large themes in the show, which is underestimating people.
Yes.
And so Silver, I think the way he presented himself, like we said in our last episode, led him to be underestimated because he comes off as just he comes off as like a little silly and a coward and not a threat, not a threatening presence.
Right.
And then we see the beautiful moment where Silver belly flops into the water, which is really painful to watch, and we will talk about that more because that's going to be a fun part of watching Silver. And then we shift over to Noonan's, to the
brothel.
The brothel. Thank
yes.
you. That's the word I'm looking for.
The whorehouse, Daphne. Don't you know about those? They don't have those in DC?
I don't know. I was just trying to be delicate. I'm not really sure why. So we were there originally with Eleanor and Max, but then we have really, really nice exchange with Eleanor and Scott. And we see a few important things that just are touched on and not. So for me, one of the important things is that Eleanor sees the one prostitute who had gotten quite beat up.
Yes.
And the madam tells her that was Vane's crew.
Oh,
that did
that's
that.
Right.
So that's like, that's just
I'm so glad that you mentioned that because I hadn't put that together, that she said that it was someone from the Ranger.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's going to have
before we really kind of have, at least for me, I was 3 or 4 episodes in before I cottoned on that the name of Flint's ship was the Walrus.
Right.
Mostly because it's a terrible ship name. I'm really disappointed. It's awful. The Ranger is super cool. The Lioness, the Scarborough, the Andromache, the Walrus. I'm like, come on, Flint. Now, Robert Louis Stevenson's fault, though.
Right.
It's from the book.
Exactly.
You couldn't change
They
it.
couldn't change
I get
that.
it.
That's so funny.
Disappointing.
And then we have this lovely exchange with Eleanor and Scott where we really start to understand their relationship, and we will talk about that more in a little bit too.
Great.
But that's a great, I mean, it gives us really good information about what they do.
Yes.
Like they are all business on one side, but we also get some great
how they are
character
getting
stuff.
these goods from the pirates and to the people.
Exactly. Next, we have the caper part of the story, which is really fun. So we have Silver arriving at the beach and getting to Max's room. Meanwhile, the Ranger crew, we have the Jack and Vane part of the story. So Jack is getting the pearls, and Jack and Vane are butting heads about this. They are not on the same page.
Yeah.
And then we have Jack going forward with his plan.
Yes.
Gates being really smart about figuring out the plan.
Yes.
So
very
that's really
impressed
great.
by Gates.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And everyone converges at the brothel, which I will now call the brothel.
Yes.
And so that's really fun because you end up having all of your characters kind of in one place, all, watching each other.
Yeah. I like that idea. It's like a caper movie. You're
It
absolutely
really
right. And I hadn't even put that together,
right.
but it's, of course it is. This whole episode really is.
Really
the great pirate caper. I like it.
smart pirates trying to outsmart other smart pirates.
Why didn't they just call it that? That's way better than episode 2.
So we have that whole part, all this stuff happening in the brothel.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have Flint.
Yes.
So then we have the moment where Flint unveils his plan.
His really quite big plan about what he wants NASA to become. Absolutely.
And yet again, he says, let me tell you the story of a Spaniard named Vasquez.
Yes.
And so now Eleanor gets his Vasquez treatment.
Yep. And she's enthralled.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And this leads to Eleanor turning in Max. Which is really, really
That's
huge.
Right. It's a big deal.
That is a really big deal. And then we have the scene at the end at the Rocks.
Yeah.
So at the Rocks at night. And again, that is very caper movie.
Is it the Rocks or the Rex? I'm always trying to understand what they're saying. I think it might be the Rex because there's a lot of
Okay, this is
there are actual Rex on the rocks, right?
This is
I'm
a
not
moment.
certain.
Right. No, that's true. It might
This is a closed captioning
I know,
moment.
seriously. We need those closed caption right now. So we have that whole thing. And then pretty much we have the end. Like the end ends with 2 parts, which a conversation with Eleanor and Scott, which we will get into.
Right.
And the moment when Flint rides off, masked again. He remasks himself and rides off to a home that we will talk about and we're not really sure much about yet.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the bones of the story.
Yeah.
And now we can get into talking about characters.
Yeah.
Prepare to board. Aye.
So let's start where the story starts. Let's start with Eleanor and Max. I had said in the last episode that it seemed to me when Max first goes up in the room with Eleanor that this is the first time because she has these weird lines like, can't life surprise you and you can't see what's right in front of your eyes. And I was like, is this the first time that they're having this sexual encounter? But then it was, and of course, because Eleanor was demurring a little bit at first. But I think now that was actually supposed to show where Max was looking to make the relationship more intimate. Maybe again, it's confusing
it's
for
a little,
me.
It's a little unclear what happened.
Shuts her up when she starts to actually talk about the thing that she has to talk about. So it was just completely unclear. But I think in this scene, when they wake up in the morning together, the way they have the conversation makes it seem as though they have actually had a relationship for a while.
Yeah.
In fact, I was confused at first that this wasn't maybe a week later or so. But of course, then we go back to the deck of the walrus, and it's like, no. This is definitely moments.
Oh, that's so fascinating. Well, we can maybe call this a redo. We can just
where the writers were like, okay,
right,
second chance.
We're resetting.
Interesting.
And for this episode, they really needed to show, the beauty and intimacy that could be there in Max and Eleanor's relationship because they're going to break it.
Yeah.
So we have this really tender beginning with them.
That's a good point. Okay.
So yeah, I really love this kind of tender beginning to it, which makes what Eleanor does way worse.
Well, yeah, but it's followed up by her going downstairs and paying for Max.
Well, and that's the reality, though. The reality of their situation is that Max is a prostitute. And I don't really, we never really 100% understand what amount of belonging to Noonan she has. I think that he is her employer, but she, for having a room there at the brothel, she has, I'm sure, some arrangement that she needs to make. And she does bring that later. Eleanor is basically paying for the privilege of having Max on that level of intimacy.
Yes, to herself.
Very
interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
But maybe that is, maybe the question should be why is Max still at a brothel when Eleanor wants her all to herself. Maybe she wants her all to herself, but not to the extent that she would actually bring her into her living space.
Yes.
If she can. We don't really know.
Yeah.
It's not really clear
That's a good point.
what the Max and like what is the relationship of the prostitutes to the owner of the brothel. But yeah, I mean, I think it's important that we see her paying because we understand a lot of uncomfortable things about their relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
That there is a lot of intimacy there, but it's not true intimacy of people who are in a relationship.
Right.
Right. And Max knows a lot about Eleanor. She understands, like she clearly understands about Eleanor's relationship with her father.
Yeah.
She wants to save Eleanor. I mean, on some level.
She does. Yeah. No, I think it's very clear in this episode that Max loves Eleanor.
Yes.
It is not clear to me at all how Eleanor feels about Max, because even when we have what we have there at the end, when Max is pleading with Eleanor to run away with her, basically, to start a new life together. And you can see that, and because we know Max to be such a smart and such a capable character, that she can imagine a life where the two of them are
up against the world.
Yeah, and making a name for themselves, and I mean, she's not wrong. They absolutely could do that.
Had this plan worked out, and had Eleanor been willing to give up being in control of this island.
Yeah, but that's her dream. That's what we see is like that's what Eleanor wants. What Eleanor wants is this idea, which now she has heard from Flint, and I think that Flint expressed it for the first time. Maybe like she always knew that she wanted Nassau, but I don't think it ever even occurred to her that she could have it on those terms, where it could be an independent nation, a nation of thieves.
And she has this whole thing that you see in the beginning that she feels like she's done so much for this island, and that she's just waiting for it all to be stripped away.
Yeah,
partially by her father.
True. Yeah,
like
that is a good point.
She really feels. I mean, in the beginning, she is distraught because she heard about the Scarborough,
right? Yeah,
and she is so concerned that she's done all this work to build something and it's just going to get pulled away from her.
Yeah.
And then Flint gives her the things she's always wanted.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And I think that Eleanor does love Max. Again, you know, we're having facial expression issues, but
well, and again, sometimes I think it's just make it an actress thing, like maybe because her face looks pained, but to me it seems like she just feels like, I feel so bad, I feel guilty.
Right, it's not 100% clear,
but you don't see that like tenderness of an expression of love,
right?
So, which I feel like we do get from Eleanor later on. So, I don't, it's hard to say.
I have decided for myself that she loves Max, but that she doesn't love her enough to give up her dream.
And I think that's where I'm trying to get.
Right.
Yeah,
that's where I'm going to put it.
Yeah. And for me, I remember watching and thinking, I hope that Max is so distraught right now because she lost her chance for freedom and this life that she had decided that she wanted, rather than a broken heart of Eleanor. But the story does go on to tell us that it's definitely about Eleanor.
She is completely right, and this will be
she's smitten.
Right, this will be a really interesting theme with Max. Is like how, and perhaps lots of the characters of like where their ambition and where their loyalty and love to other people will come into conflict with each other, and they'll have to balance those things.
That's great. You're absolutely right.
Speaking of that, we could move on to Vane and Eleanor.
Yeah. Well, and I really love Vane. And I liked him in the beginning, even though he comes out so ruthless. And in this episode, too, when he's got Max up against the wall choking her.
That's pretty terrifying.
It is terrifying.
I had a hard time loving Vane in the beginning for stuff like that.
And you should. And it's really, I mean, I think I have to give it to Zach McGowan.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
It's the actor's portrayal. When he's leaning up against that post, eating the apple, defending Eleanor, and making sure that she gets what she needs in this situation. Yep. And then when he's later up in the room with her and he's saying, hey, I want to talk about our business relationship. And you see he's a little nervous.
Right.
And he's like mincing his words and trying to be very careful to not put her, get her back up, I guess.
No, absolutely.
It's very interesting.
I wanted to contrast like my favorite Vane moment ever. And I think most people's, possibly yours too. Like my favorite is when Eleanor's trying desperately to act tough and be tough with this one captain, the captain of the Demeter.
Yes.
And she's not succeeding. And then Vane jumps in. And it was smart on her part to say to that captain when he's like, well, I'm just going to go somewhere else to sell my stuff.
Right.
And she's like, well, just don't talk about it because there's a lot of pirates around here.
Uh-huh.
And that may have worked, maybe just based on what she said. But Vane was right there to back it up. And when that guy's like, oh, I'm this tough person. And then all he has to say is Charles Vane of the Ranger. And his tune changes immediately.
Yep.
And Vane says that with such beautiful, beautiful theater of piracy.
Uh-huh.
And then
also simply,
right.
like it's a very simple statement, and he knows, like there's no question.
He knows about his
reputation. Is this going to make this guy
right.
back down, or there's no question?
Right.
Yeah.
And then the scene that you were talking about when they're in her office, and he's stammering.
Yes.
He's pausing. He's being, so the two, and that scene is right after.
Yeah.
So you have this immediate contrast of like badass Vane, who knows he's badass, and everyone else knows, and he doesn't even have to think about how he's presenting himself because he's so good at it.
Yeah.
To immediately after, he is unarmed by Eleanor.
Yeah.
Or by his feelings.
By his feelings for Eleanor.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And maybe that is why, is because, I mean, that's what draws us to characters, right? Is their vulnerability.
Exactly.
And you see it so clearly. And of course, I think that having love as a vulnerability is always something I can really relate to.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's why I don't relate to Eleanor very much, because I'm not a career-driven person.
Right.
This idea of like the ownership of this island and keeping this business doesn't really speak to me on the same way that maintaining the personal relationships speaks to me, because I'm a relational person. Like that's my community is the most important thing to me. Mm-hmm. So these other things are just like a means to an end. Like the way that I make money, it's so that I can spend time with people I want to be with. And so I can have that kind of like lifestyle that I would want to have. But the business part of it is, again, just a means to an end, where it's her identity for Eleanor.
Okay, I totally, now that you've said that, I would really love for us to pay attention to that. To people who are motivated by ambition.
Yes.
And people who are motivated by relationships. I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to track.
That's a good point, because you know what? Even just looking ahead,
right?
I think Vane is always motivated by relationships.
Well, he's motivated by a lot of things, but
he is.
But I mean,
when it comes to like your tipping point,
right.
like what's going to make you go one direction or the other, I think it's relational.
So right, and so I think that's going to be a really interesting contrast to watch with the progress of all of the characters.
Yeah.
With what their motivation is and what that ends up meaning for them, like how that affects their lives.
Yes. And maybe their identity, like the way they see themselves.
Absolutely.
Because Flint is one who, like, he will break any relationship.
Okay, let's not get too spoilery here.
Oh, no. I don't, this is not too spoilery, but he will break relationships in pursuit of whatever his goal is. Whereas... And Eleanor also, she breaks relationships in pursuit of a goal. And then we have characters like Max, who will sacrifice so much of what they could potentially gain to keep and to maintain relationships.
Right.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So yeah, we definitely should pay attention to that.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I want to stick with Vane just a little bit longer.
Oh, great.
Yeah, because I want to talk about his attitude on the Rex when he's there with Rackham and they're calling out Silver.
Sure.
And Silver is outsmarting him, sending out these men in, and he is pissed off about it. And Rackham is actually kind of enjoying the challenge.
Right.
Like you see an eyebrow go up and he's like, this guy's really smart.
Can I just make a note?
Sure.
This is our first introduction to the awesomeness that is Jack Rackham's facial expressions.
You know, I think you're right. Yeah, which are so fun. Yeah, Rackham is such a fun character to watch. And I love to see him, again, going toe-to-toe with Vane, because Vane is such a blunt instrument. Like, he has his violence and he has fear, and that's like what he rules with. Whereas Rackham is got, you know, his mind is always working, and he's always seen, like, I think that he just sees life as a chess game. Like, he's always moving all these pieces and looking, 3 and 4 steps ahead. And that's why Vane needs him so much.
Right.
But in this moment, because he has so much at stake, he is just pissed off that he's being outsmarted.
Well, and in a way, I mean, this is an interesting moment because we've seen a lot of how smart people are, like, so far. You know, we had the Flint and Singleton was a really good example of how the smart person, the storyteller, can outwit the blunt instrument, which was Singleton.
Absolutely.
This is a situation where the smart people their plans get foiled because Vane's willing to just stab a guy.
Just stab a dude. Yep.
And so that's like we're showing a little bit the flip side that there is this tension between these two things. And
that's a good point.
Right. And the smart people, I mean, I love watching smart people be smart. So this show is really great for me on that level.
Yes, definitely.
But there is this moment where it's like, don't forget us, the tough guys, because we are willing sometimes to just kill people to get what we want.
So should we talk about Jack now? About Jack?
Yeah, let's talk about Jack.
Okay.
I love Jack Rackham.
He's a great character, and he took me a while because, again, he came off as being just a little bit anachronistic in the first episode. So, and some of that they did on purpose, I think. Because
I agree.
They got even the sunglasses.
Yep.
And he was
I love those sunglasses. I love those sunglasses. Wait, are those in this episode?
No, that was the first episode.
Oh, that was the first episode.
That was the first episode because I was trying to understand this guy with the crazy hair, and he looks so 80s punk rock, and then he's got those sunglasses, and he makes and it's this episode I think that he talks about people who consider themselves too good to wear a condom, and he's just like, there's something it just feels really modern about him and about the way that he carries himself. So he's a lot of fun. You're absolutely right. So much fun to watch.
Honestly, I just love watching that man figure stuff out. And this is part of the facial expressions. Like a lot of his facial expressions are just really funny because I think he spends a lot of time kind of exasperated with the world that's not as smart as him.
Yes, absolutely he does. Well, and this is the episode where he says to Max, I don't know what's more appealing, your beauty or your intelligence, which is so important. I love to see that there's a connection with him and Max right away besides just, them being in this partnership to try to get the gain.
Right.
Yeah.
Smart meets smart, and smart recognizes smart. And that's great.
Yeah, it is. And it's also really interesting because at this point, I still do not understand the relationship between Jack and Anne at all.
Right.
Because they are so dissimilar. Like, to me, I at first thought that they had a brother-sister thing going on until she was...
Right.
until she grabs his crotch.
That's so interesting.
Nope, definitely not then.
So I want to talk about Jack making his play here. And this was something I didn't put all the parts together before, but I feel like in the last time that you and I watched together, there was an aspect of this that really, really jumped out to me.
Uh-huh.
So, obviously, Jack makes it clear to Vane. I mean, I think we understand now that their crew is not doing well.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So
right.
Eleanor's not handing them, information about ships to take.
Right.
They're not in great shape. So this goes to something in between scenes. You really have this moment where you see Vane looking with a glass out into the sea, and Anne explains to Jack that he wants to be the first person Flint sees when Flint comes back after losing his ship and his crew. Right?
Yep.
And then they have the conflict when Jack is getting the pearls to use to pay for Max, and Vane is really against this. And Vane makes good points.
He does.
He was like, what was it he said? She is the thief has 50,000 reasons to.
Yeah, or 5,000.
5,000. Right. 5,000.
They've got no reason to lie to us.
5,000 reasons to lie to us. But Jack generally, in a conversation, Jack generally is going to win because he is smarter.
Yeah. But this is one of the moments, though, where I felt like the show was a little heavy-handed with us, and I wanted them to give me a little more credit, because that is when Jack says, who else stands to gain from this? Who else might see you in a different light?
Okay,
and it's really throwing Eleanor Guthrie right in his face.
Okay, that's
then
true.
Then they cut to her face immediately. I'm
okay,
I know who you're talking about. You don't have to cut
interesting.
To her face
because I like that Jack brought it up to Vane.
Oh, I love that Jack brought it
now
up
I
to
understand
Vane.
what you're saying, that we
really,
see her next.
Really bold of Jack. Yeah.
Right.
And again, it
shows...
He knows
Vane.
Yeah, Vane will straight up stab a guy, as we discussed.
Right.
So it's a very bold thing to say, but it just shows that Jack has an understanding. He has the upper hand, and he knows what to say to get his way.
And he has motivation that I hadn't thought about before. And this, I'm going to quote him now, because then he says afterwards, I think he says it to Anne after Vane leaves. He says he thought Flint was the only one standing in the way of him being crowned king. We have this king word again.
Yeah.
So clearly, Vane, when he was waiting for Flint, we don't really know the backstory of Flint and Vane. We know they don't like each other.
Yeah.
And now I'm starting to so now you're at the point where you're understanding, they both perhaps have the same idea of being some sort of ruler of all the pirates.
Yeah, well, he had said, didn't he, in season 1, or in episode 1, rather, Vane said, if there's any future for this place,
exactly.
I am it.
And but what I love about what Jack said here is he actually putting himself in the game.
Yeah.
I didn't make that connection that when he was talking about the only one, he's saying, and he says right after that, he says the thing about Flint, Vane thinking Flint's the one standing in his way of becoming king. And then he said he was wrong. And this is where Jack, I thought he was just working as a quartermaster originally and looking at, but he's actually making a play with these pearls and this schedule.
Yeah.
He's actually making a play to perhaps be stronger than Vane.
Wow.
Right. And so I feel like
I don't know if I put that together, because I think that I thought that he was still talking about Eleanor at that point, about how if he doesn't get Eleanor back under his thumb somehow, then he's not going to be able to make these plays he's trying to have.
I think he could be talking about himself.
You know, I think that's a really,
and this is a great scheme, and he really, I mean, it is
in which case maybe it was misdirection when they then cut back to Eleanor's face.
Oh my God. Well, no, because it isn't misdirection about that Vane has something else to gain, right?
No, it's
misdirection.
That Vane only heard Guthrie and didn't realize Jack.
Right. So right. So once I looked at it that way, I kind of watched the progression of the caper a little bit differently, because Jack's not just trying to help Vane. He's possibly trying to help himself.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly, yeah.
Well,
certainly
I mean,
always
right. No, he is definitely. But I'm saying like help himself in a larger sense than just making some money, but like actually raising himself up in the hierarchy of power on NASA.
Wow.
So this is just a new thought for me. So I haven't.
I like that. Yeah.
So there's that, and then so Jack has this plan, I think, possibly to even undermine Vane, not just prop him up. Mm-hmm. And Vane, like when we're talking about this whole concept of king, we see what Eleanor sees Flint.
Right. Yeah. Flint can
offering
help usher
her
in this
right.
kingdom.
So
we
learn, but before she learns the real thing that Flint's offering, like we know that she's been favoring Flint, and I feel like Vane does this really, very brilliant moment that we already talked about. The moment where he says Charles Vane of the Ranger, and he helps her. But I wanted to talk about that in relation to what he said in the first episode about basically telling her that he's the future of the island. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that was a really wonderful, subtle way for him to show that to her.
Yes.
That she tried to use the threat of pirates as a way to prop herself up in this negotiation over the cost of goods, which wasn't going well for her. And he just swooped in and just completely demonstrated how the two of them could rule this island together.
Yeah.
That she's in charge of the, of the money.
Right.
And the trade and all of that. And he would be the strong man behind her, propping her up.
Yeah.
And she needs a strong man. She doesn't really have her father.
She doesn't. Yeah. I think that that's been made really clear.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the one who says we need to talk. So then we go into the scene in the office where he's basically proposing what he just demonstrated.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And he is definitely trying to get her to, because as far as he's concerned, it's because of their past relationship that she's not doing this anymore. He says, I believe it's personal. And he's trying to get her to look at him professionally so that he can have that position that she has given to Flint, I think.
Right.
But and that's so interesting too, because he is saying, I believe it to be personal. And it's so clear that he has such feelings for her. Like, it's so obvious. And when she talks about their relationship, it's like in the basest terms.
And she calls back to them being brutal. So this is where the prostitute in the beginning is important, because she says it's not about you and me and our relationship that we have had. This is about your crew.
Yeah, how you and your crew with
right.
other animals.
And I don't know if that's really true. I mean, she did have this thing to remind her. I'm sure it is. And she did have this reminder just, at the beginning of this very same episode. I'm not sure how much time has lapsed. Well, no, almost no time, because she went straight. None. Right. Yeah. She went from the brothel to the negotiation to the office.
Right. So and she's still got a bruise on her jaw from where he clocked her the day before. So
she started that fight. But she did just have a reminder of the brutality of his crew.
That is absolutely right.
So that was fresh in her mind. And so, again, I don't really buy her arguments here. I think I stand by my theory that we still don't know why she's been favoring Flint.
Yes.
but she has been.
Right.
And I don't think she's doing that. And wait, what does he say? He says a beautiful thing. He says, she says that he's the bad investment. And he said to her something like, you need to prop Flint up and from his vulnerability, and you're calling me the bad investment.
That's right. Yeah.
So he's bringing it home. That's like she's backing a horse that's not necessarily the horse she should be backing.
Right.
The reality is he's also not in the strongest position with his own crew, but but Flint's in a position where that's been made public.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely right.
So her motivations are very unclear, and some of them will be more clear. Flint's going to kind of help her with that because he's going to give her a reason to follow him for real. But I think before we talk about that, I want to talk about Billy and Gates.
Billy and Gates. Okay. And I don't necessarily even think of them with character development in this episode. So go ahead and walk me through that.
I don't know if it's so much development, but it is development of their relationship.
That is true.
Right?
And I do like that they're buddying up to do this together.
So, and so we see, the first thing we see of Billy is Billy showing the empty page
to Gates,
right?
Yeah,
and then we have the very adorable scene where they're up on a balcony in NASA.
You say adorable. I'm Team Billy on this one. Who is like, no.
I think it's adorable for Billy and Gates.
Yes.
No,
yes.
I am amused, and
all
I am going to say it. We have the lovely little art appraisal moment where we say, fruit, tits, plant. I don't know. Maybe
like 4 times.
Yes. Maybe the artist in me is just more amused about that than I should be. But for Billy and Gates, it's really interesting. I mean, I think we do get this is a really illustrative moment for Gates' character, because Gates is pausing while doing business. So, like, first of all, we're watching how smart Gates is.
Yeah.
He's not flashy smart.
No.
But he is smart.
Yep.
When he needs to be, he can be smart. Like him figuring out that all he needs to do is sit on this balcony and wait for the appraiser because he's already figured out how they're going to pay for this schedule.
Mm-hmm.
It's
smart.
Serious smarts.
It is. You're absolutely right.
But it's subtle. He's not being flashy about it, and he's not using it to control other people.
Yeah.
He's using
he's
it
not
in
being
service.
arrogant about it either.
No, not at all.
There's never a moment of look how smart I am. He's just getting the job done.
Right, and he's doing it for the common good.
Ah, yes.
He is not doing it for personal gain.
Yep. You're right.
So I just feel like that, and also just like that moment where he's just enjoying his island.
Yeah.
It's like there you can probably count on one hand the moments where you see a character in this show pause and just have a good time.
That's a good point.
And not in an aggressive way.
Not in an aggressive way.
He's just taking the day for what it is. He's got business to do, but he's going to take time and watch this comical scene happening in front of him. And I love that about Gates. This is one of the moments where I fell in love with Gates.
He is such a lovable character. Agreed. Yeah.
And then in addition to that, they have the really important exchange where Billy's like, "What did I do?"
Yes.
And Billy says that he did something to protect the captain. And Gates says, "No, you did this to protect the crew."
Right. Yeah. Which is exactly what Billy needed to hear, too, because that's what he was doubting in his mind, I think.
And that was his motivation. So Gates reminded him that he actually did that.
Yeah.
So it's a tiny scene.
But you're right. It's lovely.
I love it like
you're
crazy.
absolutely right to bring it up.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It really is. It is a character moment for both of them and for the relationship. And it's really going to be very important for us to understand their relationship. That's going to be a huge part of this season.
So let's get to the good stuff. Let's get to our favorite. Let's get to Flint.
Favorite.
Flint is such an extraordinary character. He is the reason that this show means to me what it does. So here we're getting a little bit about his motivations, I suppose, for the first time. Last episode, we were presented with this this captain who's in a position of weakness. We hear his story of the Urca de Lima. We hear that he's got like this prize at hand. And we also get that great little teaser to Billy. He's like, I know that the men have always thought me aloof.
Right.
And too educated.
Except Billy said weak.
Right. Yeah.
I love that moment.
Too educated, weak. I was going to say unlucky. Yeah. But now we get to see again how he's using the story and how he has a plan that is much grander than a pirate's hoard of treasure.
Exactly.
He wants a nation. He wants a free nation. we say that, he has also claimed that he is king of this nation.
Right.
So that's delicate and interesting.
Yeah, a paternalistic nation. I mean, he has clearly set himself as someone who thinks he knows what's in everyone else's best interest.
Yes.
He is
which is
not a promoter of democracy.
No, And he believes that he knows what is best for everyone, and he will tell them only as much as they need to know.
Exactly.
It's not somebody I would vote for. But it's such an interesting character because he has this grand and really romantic idea of Nassau. And boy, does he ever sell it to Eleanor too.
Yep, he does. He's amazing. And you have to, we were talking about just how he sits there. Like they bring up the fact, like he tells them that Richard Guthrie has been arrested they want to arrest him.
Right,
Or no, he
says
says
a fugitive.
No, they said he has been arrested because they don't know he's with him.
Right.
So he says that he's been arrested and they're freaking out. They're like, that's it. Life as we know it is over. And he's just lounging with his slightly still bloody self from his fight. But he's just lounging and he's doing theater.
Yes.
He is showing them how
I am not afraid of what is coming.
Right.
And if you get behind me, you don't have to be afraid either.
Exactly. Like you can always watch Flint and assume in these situations when he's trying to move people in a direction he wants them to move, you can always assume that everything he's doing is calculated.
Yes.
As part of the theater.
Until we see him go home for the first time.
True.
And I fell in love with Captain Flint when he opens that door and then just slinks to the floor, finally in a position where he can just show weakness.
Yep.
It was really beautiful.
No, it was really beautiful. It's so true. I mean, he had been holding himself together.
Yes.
And I think that was
And
something...
he looks like Toby Stephens is just magnificent because you can see how tightly wound he is.
Exactly.
Like even when he is relaxing and looking like devil may care, you know that it's a show.
Right.
You know that he's working towards something.
Right.
When he goes home and collapses, God, it's beautiful.
Right. Right. And we don't know what this home is. I mean, it's such a fascinating thing.
Yeah.
We don't know what this place is. I love that he puts the mask on again. That he's watching, all of his crew are like celebrating in this. He's done his job.
Yes.
He can put his mask back on now to take himself to a home. We don't really know what this is to him. It's a home where a woman is playing a harpsichord. It is so removed from everything we've seen up until now.
Yes. It's so domestic and simple.
So domestic and simple.
Ready to guns! Full complement!
All right. So what's the big theme of this episode?
So in this episode, I really want to focus on one big theme.
Okay.
And I love this theme. And I feel, again, this is one of the themes we're going to see throughout. The thing, and I really actually have to credit Lonnie at Storywonk, who I follow her. I follow their podcast about Outlander.
Yes, and you should too if you're a fan of Outlander.
So
if
good.
you're watching the other Starz show,
it is so good.
Follow the Scott and the Sassenach.
Yeah, they're wonderful. And Lonnie brought up that Bear McCreary put the Sky Boat song into this episode, and I have to admit that I did not notice it until then.
Yeah, and I heard you and I saw the conversation on Twitter where you and she were talking about that, and even the second time in the watch through, I missed it, and I had to ask you where it was. But you're right, the placement is so important.
Right, and the crazy cool thing about it is that I did look up more about the song afterwards, and I didn't realize that the most famous version of it was actually written by Robert Louis Stevenson.
That's incredible.
Right. So we have a complete tie-in between Treasure Island and the Sky Boat song, which is a song about exile. It's a song about the exile of the Bonnie Prince Charlie, the Jacobites from England. We don't need to go into that whole history. Again,
it's another podcast.
Again,
the Scott and the Sassenach.
Yeah, the Scott and the Sassenach. Alistair Stevens will tell you all about that.
Yes.
It was that moment. Like, I really do believe that that each episode kind of has a sort of thesis statement.
Yes.
And I was really searching for the one here, and the fact that song is playing at the moment when Eleanor is trying to convince Scott to go along with Flint's plan, I realized the theme here is exile and home and finding home and trying to find home. And this goes then to the thing that Flint said when he's talking after he says the story of the Urca Dilema.
Yes.
He talks about Odysseus.
Yeah. In a beautiful little narrative sequence that he does. Again, Toby Stephens, so good.
I know. He's so brilliant. Yeah. And so he's telling the story, and he says, when Scott doesn't believe him, he says a beautiful thing about the pirates. He says that they aren't animals, they're men starved of hope.
That's right.
So
and if you give that back to them,
right, he's really framing the whole pirate culture as a culture of exiles. And then he tells the story of Odysseus, which is a story of an exile coming home. And I think he's making it really clear, and I'm pretty sure I've heard the writers say that this is Flint's Odyssey. He identifies with Odysseus. And
absolutely.
Can I quote him again?
Please do. I will hear Flint quotes all day long, girl.
Great, because I will read them all day long. So, this is 100%, but he's talking about Odysseus, and he says that after he has slayed his enemies and set his house in order once more, a ghost tells him to pick up an oar and walk inland and keep walking until somebody mistakes that oar for a shovel. For that would be the place that no man had ever been troubled by the sea. And I think that pretty much sums up what Flint's trying to do.
And he says, and that's all I want in the end is to go home and find some peace.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what he wants. He wants to create a pirate republic that is free from England.
Yes.
Where they can just live the lives they were meant to live. He really believes that the pirates are not monsters, that they are people who want to live peaceful lives.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because when he says that, it seems like when he accomplished that, he would just walk away. Then he would just have his peaceful farm here on the island. But that's not what he said to Billy in the boat. He said, we need a king and I'm your king.
Right.
And I think he is really wrestling with that. I'm not certain that Flint knows what he wants or what he can be. I'm not certain that he believes he can have the peace that he's looking for.
Right. And I agree. And I think that pretty much this show is the show of unraveling who Flint is and what he really wants.
Yes.
And we will learn so much over time. And it's a great ride. I just think the process of learning who Flint is my favorite story ever.
Wow.
I really, really love it. And I just do think, I think that this now, we had kind of the larger themes.
Yeah.
In the last episode, the kind of grand world themes.
Right, yes.
And this made it more personal. And the fact that we see him in a home right after he said this, we can only draw the conclusion that this is his home. This is the representation of what he's trying to reach.
Well, and I love the very simple greeting he gets when he gets there and the woman stands up. We don't know who she is. We don't know her name or anything. But she says, take off your boots. I'll boil some water.
Right.
And again, it's just such a simple, obviously this is his, whatever home that he has, this is the closest thing to it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful, just simple domestic moment where we don't get explanation, but we understand.
Yep. Yeah, it's really lovely. Okay, so that's going to wrap us up, I think, for episode 2. Thanks again for listening to Fathoms Deep. From Common Room Radio, I'm Liz Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive.
We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Fathoms Deep is a Common Room Radio production. For more information and access to other programs, please visit us at commonroomradio.com. To show your support, pledges of as little as $1 a month can be made to patreon.com/commonroomradio. Join the conversation by using the hashtag FatHomsDeep and follow us on Twitter at BlackSalesCast. We ask that you keep your tweets respectful and positive, and please avoid spoilers. If you have more to say, we want to hear it in all its spoiler glory. Email us at podcast@commonroomradio.com with Fathoms Deep in the subject line. Thanks for listening.